Local Food Plus, for example, certifies businesses, including food producers, as local and sustainable according to a number of criteria, and one of those is safe and fair working conditions for on-farm labor. But the scope of this certification is very modest. I downloaded the growers and food processors that are certified. They're all lumped together, and there's only 84 on the list. In the US, there's the Agricultural Justice Project that has been working on establishing social justice standards for the food system. And there's also a domestic fair trade working group that has proposed a food labeling system. But overall, local food movements in Canada and the US have engaged very marginally with labor and immigration issues. While local food and direct marketing campaigns prioritize supporting farmers, for example, other food system workers are largely invisible. And this maintains ideologies of agrarianism, in which farming is given moral and economic primacy over other occupations and livelihoods. And also the agricultural exceptionalism that's been used to deny farm workers the same set of labor rights that most workers enjoy. Today, 2013, in Ontario, farm workers, migrant and citizen farm workers, continue to be denied the right to form unions and collectively bargain. And it was only 6 years ago that the provincial government included farm workers in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The privileging of farmers over food system workers by the local food movement thus reifies power across relationships of race, ethnicity, citizenship, and class. A number of scholars have also problematized this whole veneration of localization at the expense of a more complex understanding of the political economy of food. For example, some critics have worked hard to dismiss the conflation of local and organic with justice. So Julie Guthman, who's written on the capitalization of organic production in California, for example, has argued that part of the reason that local has achieved such prominence in food politics is the failure of organic agriculture to address social justice issues. The silence within the alternative food movement around labor and also immigration issues may also indicate an assumption that local communities and local farmers embody social justice rather than any proof that they do. Another example, that could be a whole talk is how the veneration of localization rests on shaky empirical grounds is the whole concept of food miles, which tells us that purchasing a tomato grown in an Ontario greenhouse that's heated by subsidized natural gas and produced and harvested by a migrant flown in from Thailand is greener than one produced in Mexico by a Mexican and air freighted in a commercial jet from Cancun, carrying, Canadian snowbirds that have been, holidaying. Or that, the sugar snap peas that we buy from an on-farm market that we drove to in our SUV are more sustainable than those air freighted from Guatemala that are produced by a small farmer whose probably extended family's carbon footprint is still smaller than the producers who grew them. The absence of labor issues within the local movement is also reflected in academic scholarship of global agri-food systems. Ben Selwyn at the University of Sussex, some of his work argues that global commodity chain, global value chain, and global production network frameworks that really dominate thinking about global agri-food systems, and that's 4 globals in one sentence, have paid insufficient attention to work and workers. More recently, scholarship in the area of social upgrading has tried to bring more attention to bear on labor and workers. But overall, the impact of changes under globalization on work process and labor and the living conditions of food and farm industry workers remains understudied and under-theorized. And again, I think there is an independent study opportunity in just doing a content analysis of all the abstracts submitted to the Rural Sociology Society or the American Agricultural Economics Association, to see which ones deal with farmers and which ones deal with farm workers. So what does this mean for the ethics and politics of food? And where do we go from here? First, if social actors within alternative food movements want to extend their conceptualization of sustainability to include social justice and avoid reproducing the existing social privileges that they often embody, then perhaps it's time to recognize the local and fair dichotomy as false, as Kevin Morgan has suggested, and rather incorporate both local/green and global/fair within food systems, so that we extend our responsibility of care globally beyond our localities. Similarly, as noted earlier, organic and fair cannot be assumed. And uncoupling these dichotomies is part of Patricia Allen's call to local food movements to combat these entrenched ideologies, such as agrarianism, and I would add nationalism, in order to work towards social justice. Improving the situation of migrant and citizen farm workers in Canada depends on expanding their access to rights and expanding their enjoyment of rights. And in order to move this agenda forward, alternative initiatives for a sustainable food system can work together with movements for migrant and farm worker rights. Over the past decade and almost a half, there has been a social movement that has coalesced around advancing migrant rights, including agricultural and food industry workers. And it includes a number of organizations and activists working across Canada at the community, provincial, federal, and even global levels. And some of those people are in this room. Engaging with these social actors will undoubtedly push alternative food movements to a more critical, inclusive understanding of the contemporary political economy and capitalist social relations. And further, push us beyond our fixation on consumer choice to a realization that working with social movements to change legislation is critical to achieving justice. While the local food movement should be celebrated for what it has achieved so far in promoting our education of how localities are imbricated in a globalized capitalist market, and also supporting alternatives to industrialized agriculture, we must encourage the actors within it to adjust their rear view mirrors to include workers and labor and immigration issues within this moral economy of food, bending our understanding of sustainable towards a broader vision of social justice and the historical inequalities that have defined our food system. And I think that there's a lot more things that we can add to this list, but we can do that in the discussion period.